another edition of VC Ag Today. Very excited. We've got a great lineup today. Our topic is going to be increasing grazing days in Eastern Virginia. And we've got a lot of different topics that I think are going to be covered by our two guest speakers, everything from stockpiling tall fescue all the way down to using some summer and winter annuals and rotational grazing, touching on some of the Graze 300 initiatives within Virginia Cooperative Extension. So with that being said, we're very pleased to have our Senior Extension Agent out of Culpeper, Virginia, Mr. Carl Stafford, joining us, as well as Mr. Tim Tobin, who is a producer of Swallow Hill Farm in Caroline County, Virginia. And both of those gentlemen are going to be speaking on these topics this morning and hopefully facilitate a great discussion afterwards and get some questions answered as we move into the fall grazing season here in Eastern Virginia. So one or two quick housekeeping notes before we get started. We have asked everyone to please remain muted throughout the presentation. We want to give our speakers a chance to get through their presentations, and then we'll open it up at the end for questions and discussion. If you have a comment or question, if you have the ability to put that in the chat window, if you're joining us via a desktop or a computer, just jot that down in the chat window, and we'll be glad to address those as we get through the presentation at the end. So with that being said, we appreciate everyone joining us, and Carl, we appreciate you and Tim being with us this morning, and we'll turn it over to you all. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to share a screen here, and you'll bear with me. I'm going to start with the video, and I'll shut up and let the video do the talking. Let's see. February 23rd. This is video. I'm Carl Stafford with Virginia Cooperative Extension. We're in Madison County, Virginia, and we're coming on late winter.
Yeah, we can hear it, Carl.
These cattle have been grazing stockpile since the end of October, 1st of November. We had a bad season this year. There wasn't enough rain. We didn't grow the grass that we needed to make it through at least 300 days of grazing. But we bought extra hay, and that's the idea behind Graze 300, so you can carry more cattle, feed hay more days, and have smaller nets but more of them, so total net revenue is higher when you graze more days. These are fall calving cows, calves born starting in August through 1st of October, and they'll go to market June or July as weaned vaccinated cattle. So right now the market is separating out cattle that have not had anything done to them. Will be as much as $100 a head discount compared to cattle that have been weaned and vaccinated, at least double vaccinated, and that's what we're kind of having to go towards now to get those extra dollars. You know, we're looking at costs between $600 and $800 a cow. In effect, that's the value that the calves have got to generate to break even. So it's possible in this market with producer groups to generate as much as $900, maybe $1,000. You got to have big cattle to do that. But $900 is not out of reason on average between steers and heifers. So if you budgeted $800, it looks like you're going to be able to meet that budget this year in 2020. So we're strip grazing. We've got a poly wire in the foreground that gives them an allocation of grass by the day. Some are really good at calculating how much grass to give. You know, it's so many feet. The way I do it is I give them a chunk of grass and I look at what's left the next day. So, excuse me, in the cattle feeding industry, they call that calling the bunks. So you offer the cattle in a feedlot so much diet. The next day you look at what's left and make adjustments. That's exactly what's going on here. Is there's adjustments almost on a daily basis, and the better you get at it, the fewer adjustments you need to make, but there's differences. There's elasticity in this system. It's weather, weather is the big factor, but the elasticity is also in the grass. So we measure grass, but we can't measure every square foot. However, the cattle are measuring every square foot every day, so that kind of feedback gives the manager very reliable information to use on a day-to-day basis. Daily moves just about maxes out the utilization of the grass, You don't want to utilize every bit of it. You know, 80% is a good number, leaving some residue, not forcing them to eat stuff that would suppress their performance. And those are just thoughts for you to consider. This is Carl Stafford, Graze 300, Madison Day.
Okay, so that video is self-explanatory. Let me switch to a picture, and you all can see that okay, and you can hear me?
Yes, sir, Carl. We can see
So
it.
this is a still shot of bale grazing. So in the lower right-hand corner, you can see that polywire, and what I'm doing is moving across this landscape. The bales were pre-positioned, and they're turned to the bale of hay as they move across that landscape with the grass as well. So you notice they've had access to that bale, but now they're refusing to eat it. I'm not real proud of the way that hay is, and they're pretty proud of the quality of the grass they're eating. These are spring calving cow, first calf heifers actually, and they're not too hard to keep in the condition they're in. But so bale grazing is really is a fertilizer program, a fertility program. You set it out where it's needed. You see in the background next to those pines where they've eaten a couple bales. I chose those spots, and the spot there in the foreground for a place that I thought needed some fertility. It wasn't based on a soil sample. It was based on a visual appraisal of the situation. So bale grazing. There's a big grant in by several states led by West Virginia and Kentucky, and Virginia's participating in that. We hope to learn more from it and make some definitive statements about bale grazing. So now I'm gonna get out of this picture if I can figure out how to do it. And Robbie, you might pipe up. I want to close that picture, so, but I don't want to shut down the whole talk. But Robbie, what would you do?
Carl, you should be able to go to the top right-hand corner of your screen.
Okay.
Yep,
Correct.
and click that. Yes, sir.
And we'll finish up with a classic. You all can see that, and you can, so extension people do a lot of this with PowerPoints, and I've tried not to do it all that way, but Graze 300 is a branded program Virginia Cooperative Extension thinks there's value in, and so do I. And it originally started in 2005, and it's an understated principle of trying to get people to graze year-round. Well, found out, backed into the idea that it actually was less profitable to graze year-round. So we'll get into that. So what is, Bobby Clark prepared this PowerPoint, so I have to give him credit for that. If you're doing anything, never use somebody else's work without giving them credit. And so it's a systems approach, and we're going to focus on stocking rate, those forage resources, labor, and in theory, try to graze 300 days. And so why 300 days? Well, we're about trying to reduce that biggest cost. And so folks, when we're grazing, and the big boys are feeding hay, we're competing with them economically. To me, it's the only thing a small producer can do to compete with the big operators who have all the other advantages. So if you can figure out how to graze more days of the year, you begin to compete with the big ones that can, buy by the pallet and sell by the trail load. And we don't do any of that, but we can control our biggest cost, and that's one of the things that I think drives this. So we're gonna make some money that way. And so how do you do it? Well, you've got to have nature to cooperate with you. I'm not reading you all the stuff that's in writing there, but you've got to have rain first, and then you've got to have rain in time. So if it waits till October to rain, you've lost a couple months of growing season. It's wet now, at least in my area. I hope it is in yours, and we're beginning the fall stockpiling in really good shape. You've got to have some control over the animals. That infrastructure that the districts and USDA are paying for are great, and they're giving you some control if you use it. And then you've got to have some filling in the gaps with whether it's bale grazing or some annuals, but keeping those cattle well fed. And we're often renting land, so maybe we can't pay the mortgage on a piece of land, but we can sure pay the rent. And then that stocking rate really drives it. So if you've got a cow and calf pair to the acre, you're going to be feeding hay before Thanksgiving, and you probably already know that. Bobby has made a nice graph here about putting the cows, the cow population on the lower right, lower left is the biggest, highest stocking rate that farm, 250 acres experienced, and then over to the right. And so what you find is that the return begins to go down, the fewer animals, of course, but the high grosses in that big herd of cows. And let's see what that was all about. So that high gross was over $100,000, but they didn't make any money, right? So they lost 6,000 on that group of cows, but they sure grossed a lot of money, and that would often be the approach. In fact, it might be the normal approach. You know, more cattle will make us more money, right? If you're making money. The other comparison is the 300 days, and it's round figures. About 100 cows less, didn't gross near the money, but netted good money, netted $36,000. So a $200 head, you see how I rounded that off, a $200 head profit is not bad, and we can make that do something for us. And so I'll quit right there and give the floor over to Tim. And I'll stop sharing, and I think that might give you all back control if that's right.
Thanks, Carl. Tim, you should have the ability to go ahead and share your screen now.
All right. So can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. So I'd like to give you a little bit of background on our farm. We raise grass-finished beef for direct sale to consumer, and the direct sale to consumer gives us a bit more flexibility in that we can make a better margin per animal. And in the background of this picture, you can see summer annuals, and that's prior to the first grazing. And let's see, I am having trouble. My slides are not advancing. Hold on a second. Let me see if I can figure out what's going on.
Maybe it's because mine's still open. Yep. Now you.
All right, let's see. I think I can advance it here. There we go.
There you go.
All right, so we have 142 acres here on the farm, and about 100 of it is open. We lost a little bit when we put in the livestock exclusion system. This slide gives you an idea of our paddock layout. We once had two large fields that we would run our cattle in, and pretty much in set stocking. But we found through the education that we've received and through practice that we actually can extend and increase our availability of forage by rotating our animals. And so we have 11 paddocks. This kind of runs a little counterclockwise, but each of these paddocks are divided into smaller segments. And you can see, if you look at paddock 2B, you can just barely see where the next couple of rotations have occurred. One, you know, that darker green is starting to disappear from right to left, and that's where the cattle are being grazed in this particular picture. We have, fortunately, with the assistance of the NRCS and the Soil and Water Conservation District, we were able to install a watering system when we installed our rotational grazing strategy. And the blue in this picture gives you an idea of where water is. We have 28 permanent watering points. A lot of those are quick connects or frost-free hydrants. But again, having this infrastructure really helps us in our ability to extend our grazing, because we can extend the availability of our forages by allowing that forage, whether it's perennials or annuals, to bounce back. It's grazed one day, they move to the next little cell. That grass gets the chance to start recovering immediately. And it is usually a month or more before we come back around and graze that same piece of ground again. Our operational strategy is to raise naturally produced products. Our advantage is a fortunate thing. Even though this area is a little higher cost, we're accessibly located between Richmond and DC. We're less than 10 minutes from I-95, and we get a lot of drop-in folks. In maximizing our forage production, we have, when we first got into the rotational grazing thing, we recognized that a lot of our perennial pastures are not producing that well. So we've started renovating our perennial pastures with improved varieties. Every year we put a little bit of additional overseeding in, mostly legumes, but also some brassicas, clovers, hairy vetch, things like that do really well just by being frost seeded. Hairy vetch is kind of a large seed, but it does well with frost seeding. We also double crop seasonal annuals. It's an expensive process because we spend around $1,500 in the spring and again in the fall for the seeds alone to plant those seasonal annuals. But the biomass production is amazing. And that's one of the things we found is we can produce a lot of high quality forages for our cattle to eat, and has a lot of great diversity, gives us great ground cover so that we can encourage the development of soil microbes. We've also started establishing native warm season grasses. Our first paddock to be done was Eastern Gamagrass, and we just started grazing that this year. Given that it's his first year, we're not hitting it too hard, but so far we've grazed it twice. We expect to graze it at least once again before the fall. And as I mentioned before, the daily moves help until the forage is gone. Some years we graze all the way into late January, early February. We'll be grazing those cool season annuals. I would say the majority of years we are not as fortunate to be able to do that because we either have a dry fall or it's too wet. Just as Carl said, it really depends on the weather, whether you're able to grow a good crop or not. Matching livestock to available forage. That's the area where I think we need to do a better job. We have been working to grow our livestock herds. We do cattle and sheep as well. So we've been trying to increase the amount of production on our land. And of course, the ultimate conclusion to that is you find that you're overstocked. We produce beef, lamb, had been producing goat. We do eggs and honey as well. This gives you an idea of the production that we're currently getting off of our farm. I do think we need to cut back a little bit on our beef. We have 75 beef animals. That's not animal units, that's actual beef. We produce 20 to 25 finished beef per year. With sheep, we have 26 ewes. That'll produce 30 to 40 finished lambs. Chickens, we do eggs. That gives us over 1,000 dozen eggs. Beehives, the honey has been an amazing product line. Unfortunately, bees are a challenge to keep, and we work on kind of increasing that. We got up to 23 hives, but that was a little hard to manage. So we're running about that 8 hive level right now. We have guard llamas to protect our small animals, and hogs we buy into our farm. This is may be helpful to some folks, but this is kind of a rough and dirty revenue projection spreadsheet. Just to, you can do this on your farm just to see what kind of revenue you might be able to bring in. And then of course you have to work on the cost side. Most of this is gross revenue. Some of it, as an example, the hogs, because we buy them in, I've put in basically what our expected net is after paying for the hog. So, we should get $200 per hog, and we purchase anywhere from 6 to 10 hogs a year and take directly to butcher, so we don't have to worry about them consuming forages off of our farm. Our sales strategy, we want to produce a high quality artisan beef. The prices are based on USDA grass-fed beef report, at least until this year. This year has changed a little bit because of the COVID issues, beef prices have been going crazy all across the country, and we've increased our beef prices by about 18%, which is below what beef prices nationally are doing. We sell most of our product by shares, quarters, halves, and wholes. We reserve about 25% of the animals we take to the butcher to be sold by the individual cut in our store here on the farm. We're open 7 days a week. Our biggest challenge right now is meeting the demand that people are showing for grass-finished beef. So there's an opportunity out there for producers. If you're not already taking advantage of that, it's best to be a price setter rather than a price taker. If you have that opportunity to be able to set your prices and draw that business to your farm, it's a lot better than having to take your animals to the livestock market and basically take whatever they give you for them. We do refer unmet needs to other farms. We can't produce enough beef to satisfy our customer base. So folks that do a really good job raising grass-finished beef, we refer our customers to if we're not able to meet their needs. I mentioned improving perennial pastures. We have our pastures on a rotation now, trying to replace them with a more productive forage. This field was reseeded or basically started from scratch in 2016. We planted alfalfa, Max-Q, fescue, orchard grass, and Ladino clover. And this is the way it looked at the beginning of the grazing season, or just a little before the grazing season. And you can see a little scary because you end up taking this whole paddock out when you're renovating it. But what you get in return is a very highly productive pasture that also is very good for your animals, because you're eliminating the endophyte infected fescue. That's interesting to say, with a non-infected or a beneficial endophyte fescue. So the animals produced really well on this. I pretty much exclusively allow these paddocks that we've renovated with this mix for our finishing beef. We finish steers and heifers, and they really do put on the pounds when we have them on this type of forage. This is just showing how the alfalfa looks in the pasture. What's interesting is, even though alfalfa is supposed to have a pretty long recovery time, with the deep root that the alfalfa has, it comes back a lot faster than the fescue and the orchard grass does. So I've been really impressed with its performance. It's hard to get a really good stand inside of a fescue orchard grass pasture, especially if you're just doing no-till seeding as we do. Getting that seed bed right for that little small alfalfa seed is somewhat of a challenge. This is the second grazing. If you look at the picture on the right, that's the second grazing this season of our Eastern Gamagrass pasture. And so it responded really fast after that first grazing. It jumped up quite quick, and the big clumps that you see in there are Black-eyed Susan. So we have issues with encroaching weeds, just like anybody does. But the cows love that. It performed really well. This is an image of some of our highly productive annuals. Our cows just can't wait to get in there. We run both our finishing herd and our cow-calf herd in there, and they all love it. Boy, when they run out, they really give me a hard time. And this is a picture of how tall the forage is and how the cattle get in there and knock it down. If they don't eat, they trample onto the ground, and it helps to build our soil. These are pictures of some of our finishing animals, and they really do gain well on both of these. The one on the left is the annual pasture. The one on the right is the perennial pasture. And like I say, those finishing paddocks are pretty much reserved for the finishing beef. We want to give them the very best forages. And when they run through, we kind of run them through as quickly as we can, give them as much as they can eat in a day, and don't worry about eating everything. And then we'll run the cows and the calves back through there and let them do the cleanup. These are some pictures of our seasonal annuals. What you see on the left from December 2017, that was the year we were able to graze all the way into the end of January. And that includes a lot of brassicas and tillage radishes, and those cows will get down in there and they'll pull the radishes right up. Generally, they'll eat about half of them and they'll eat the greens on top. And if the weather is right, some of that will regrow that same winter, but by spring, you've got more to graze. And the picture on the right is the most recent view of the annuals that we're grew this past winter, and was a little slow to get going, but boy, when it came on strong. And that's our finishing herd in there eating that mix of cool season annuals. Another opportunity for increasing production, not so much increasing the forage availability, but heat stress management. And the picture on the left was our strategy for dealing with our finishers when they're out in the summer annuals where we have no shade, and just have a sprinkler there, and they knew to come over. They would come over to the fence, line up, and I'd turn the sprinkler on, cool them down, then they'd go back out and grazing, and I'd turn the sprinkler off. But a better strategy is to provide shade for them. If you have trees in your paddock, it's good to be able to give them access to that. But an even better strategy in my mind is the portable shade structure, because you can actually move it around. You can put it where you have some poor soil, and of course what they'll do when they're grazing, they'll eat, they'll come back, they'll lounge around underneath the shade, and they'll deposit all those nutrients in that area. So it's almost like bale grazing, where you can have them drop the nutrients in that particular area. And that will help you to maximize the production of forage on your farm, improve the areas that are not as highly productive as they could be. So what's next? Of course, these are a couple of our products that we produce here. But what's next in my mind for our farm, we try to do a little something every year to improve our performance. What's next for us is finding that sweet spot. We feed way too much hay. We do extend our forages using those different techniques. The native warm season grasses fill in that summer slump that you see with fescue-based pastures. And the annuals fill in a little bit more of the summer slump, as well as the slump that we see during the wintertime. So finding that sweet spot is trying to figure out exactly what the best stocking rate's going to be for our farm. I think reducing the stocking rate a little bit is actually going to increase our net revenue, because we are buying way too much hay. And whenever time is right, I'll be happy to answer any questions folks may have about how we do things here at Swallow Hill Farm. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Tim. We really appreciate you taking some time to join us this morning. Excellent presentation. With that being said, I just took a look at the chat window and I don't see any questions or comments there. So I guess at this time, thank you again, Carl and Tim, for joining us this morning. We'll just go ahead and open it up for discussion, and I'm going to take off the security. So you should have the ability to unmute yourselves. You should see a button on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen where it has the mute button. If you just click that one time, it should allow you to unmute. So I'm going to go ahead and let folks unmute themselves. I just asked if you are in an area where there's a lot of background noise or something, if you could just make sure you either mute during that or try to avoid as much background noise as possible. So with that being said, if anyone has any questions or comments, hopefully we can facilitate a little discussion this morning with these two experts.
Tim,
No,
interested in the age of these finishing animals when you send them to the slaughterhouse?
missed the first part of your question.
So how old are your animals when you send them to slaughter?
The minimum that we use for the animals is 18 months for the heifers and 24 months for the steers, but we end up, that's basically trying to figure out what the minimum is, but that usually occurs between our seasonal harvest periods. We harvest our animals in June and October. So ideally, our animals will be just short of 30 months for steers and about 20 to 22 months for our heifers. And we found that the quality of the meat is by far more superior the longer we go. We get a lot better. We get a lot better marbling by waiting, and I kind of think about it like teenagers. When I was younger, and when I was in college, I could eat anything, and I could eat as much of it as I wanted to. But once I became a full-fledged adult, it wasn't hard to put on weight. But I couldn't put on weight. I was trying to achieve a certain weight when I was younger. Couldn't do it. I could eat as much as I wanted to do, as much as I wanted to eat, and I couldn't gain that extra weight. And I think that's the way the cattle are when they're younger. It's difficult to put that weight on them, particularly on a grass-based system. I think if you were able to sit that ice cream, the corn and the grain in front of them, they of course can gain a lot of weight, but it's more difficult on forage, and our customers are very pleased with the product they receive.
Tim, I see a question here in the chat asking, how do you price your meat products?
Historically, we priced our meat products using the USDA report on grass-finished beef. And as I mentioned before, that's changed a little bit because the USDA report doesn't really keep up with what's going on with this coronavirus. And so to supplement our knowledge about pricing, we'll look at businesses like Wegmans and other grocery stores to look at their grass-finished beef prices and set to some extent based on that. And the total revenue per animal that we receive is anywhere from $2,800 an animal up to over $3,400 an animal. So a lot of that depends, of course, on their hanging weight. But when we started out, we were starting at the low for the USDA grass-finished beef prices. But as we develop more and more demand, we're moving that price more toward the average for the grass-finished beef prices. We also use, there's a grass-finished lamb goat report that comes out as well. That doesn't have quite as good information in it, but we utilize that. We set our lamb prices at the 50th percentile, right at the average for grass-finished lambs on that USDA report. One of the things you remember probably about economics is it's a supply-demand type of thing. If you have more supply than the customer's demanding, your price is going to have to be lower. If you have more demand than you have supply, which is our fortunate problem right now, you can gradually work your pricing up. I don't see us setting prices be above that 50th percentile, but if you look online at grass-finished beef prices at these websites that ship product, those products they're selling online are probably twice what we're charging. So there's a lot of range there for farmers to look at to be able to draw some additional revenue into their farm.
That your next subject area reminds me that in Eastern Virginia and in the Culpeper area, that crop harvest residue, corn stalks in particular, it's a wonderful resource if you can just get figure out a way to utilize it. And every time I'm measuring a corn yield, Mike brought us, I'm thinking, gosh, this looks like good feed right after harvest. And of course, there's some grain on the ground. So you grazing people listening today, figure out how to use some of that corn stalk residue and talk to your corn growers and rent some land from them or something. So overcome the water and the fencing and get that corn stalk residue into your grazing plan.
Tim, this is Mike Broadus. How you doing today?
Hey, good, Mike. How are you?
I'm good, sir. Good to hear from you.
You too. Good to have you on.
Paul.
Yes, sir. My pleasure.
Tim, I got a question. What is your stocking rate? I have been by your farm and I have seen you grow that grama grass, and I did not know what it was. I thought it was Sudan grass.
What's out front is sorghum Sudan grass.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
And, our stocking rate is about 1.3 acres to animal. Now or to the beef animal. That's not 1.3 acres per animal unit. So it's probably a little higher than that. It's probably about 1.5 acres per animal unit.
okay. I know early on you said you weren't grazing 300 days a year, but you wanted to, and of course everybody.
I've been trying. I've been reading.
With-
Unfortunately, the real incentive for farmers is to keep adding animals so that you can increase your revenue. But of course, as you increase your animals, you increase your costs, especially at that upper end, in an exponential way. So every animal you add it might add $1,000 of revenue to you. But if you're spending $1,500 on hay or on other expenses, it's not a good add for your business. And we've been really struggling to try to meet our customer demand. But at some point you have to say, as I mentioned before, here's another good farm that you can take a look at. And if all of us work together as producers that are trying to meet the customer need, we can capture that customer base in our region rather than having them go to places like Wegmans or ordering offline or online. So there's no reason why I have to try to keep everybody in my customer base if I'm not meeting their needs. It just frustrates that many more people. So send them to a friend, send them to another farmer that is doing a good job. And by that, we support the ag community. We support the family-owned farms, and it's a good thing for our community.
Yes, sir. But back to that gamma grass. I was very impressed with the pictures you just showed of gamma grass. It looks to be provide a lot of quantity.
It does, and it's a little more thinly spaced than I would like ultimately, but there's going to be a lot of reseeding that goes on. It was already producing seed this year. We planted that gamma grass plot in December of 2018. So this past year, we didn't graze that pasture at all, and we burned it in the spring. And when I say burned it, I burned it with fire, not with glyphosate, and it came back really nicely.
Gotcha. Yeah, I know some producers who plant Bermuda grass. They plant crabgrass for July and August and early September grazing. I've never dealt with gamma grass. I had to look it up actually when you were talking.
Yeah. You ought to come by sometime. I'll show you around. JB's coming by today to help me figure out what's going on with my other native warm season grass that we just planted. We planted in June, blue stem, and Indian grass. So looking to see if that's going to give us good production as well in the summertime. You guys know better than I do probably the fescue in this area. As soon as it turns hot, man, it just turns off.
Right.
And so you've got to have something that fills in that gap. I think folks that live in the the higher elevations out west in the Blue Ridge, you can get a little better production because you've got cooler nights. But in this area, you know, it stays in the 80s at night, and that fescue just shuts down at that time.
Thank you, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Any other questions for Tim or Carl this morning? I've got a comment or question I'll make, but I'll hold off until some folks have a chance that are joining us, either other agents or producers. If you have questions or comments, please share those. Well, Carl and Tim, the question that I had, and maybe you can just touch on this a little bit briefly. You know, I know a lot of producers rely pretty heavily on fertilizer usage in late February, early March on their pasture land and stuff. Can y'all talk a little bit about maybe some results or what you've seen? I know you both briefly mentioned, you know, utilizing refuge hay, moving around your shade areas and stuff to kind of strategically place some of those nutrients in the pasture, but could you talk a little bit about how you have seen that work throughout the years, and maybe incorporating some of these legumes into your pastures to help with some of that nitrogen credit? Have you seen a big benefit to that, and maybe a reduction in more of your traditional fertilizer usage through some of those better management methods?
Carl, you want to start?
I've substituted the purchase of poultry litter, taking the same dollars and bought hay. And so hay's now my fertilizer program. And what drives that is understanding that once you have a long-term pasture, there's a nitrogen cycle in that ground. And the organic matter is the source of that nitrogen. And as it breaks down, it releases carbon dioxide, and you can run a carbon dioxide test to get an indication if your ground is releasing the amount of nitrogen you hope you should have. And so Alan Franz Luber's USDA Ag Research Service is the source of this information. He's done work all over many locations. So if you've got an old pasture, nitrogen is probably not needed in that pasture. Now, you'll get a boost from the nitrogen, but is it an economic boost? And that's Alan's work, is, you know, is the yield you get from added nitrogen paying for itself? And in many cases, it's not. So the distribution of that bale grazing is important, that the bales go where the land needs it. And that's my fertilizer program.
And that sounds pretty familiar. Sounds like what we're doing to large part. When we first started using the annuals, we fertilized after every planting. You know, once that forage started to come up, we'd put fertilizer on it. And that really increased our cost of production quite a bit. So we've been working to get away from that, working to build the soil life on our farm so that we can get that natural nutrient cycling working here in a much better way. And as I mentioned, we also frost seed a lot of legumes on our perennial pastures, and that produces a lot of nitrogen for us. I'd say in the normal year, we probably have a good 30% legumes in our pastures. In the established pasture, the older pasture, that legume also helps to dilute the toxic endophyte that's in the fescue. So it's a good thing from that standpoint as well. This past year, we put 200 tons of poultry litter on our farm. And the idea there was this is going to be a game changer for us. It gets our soil nutrient values to the proper level that we can actually have that cycling of nutrients. We've got enough potassium, enough phosphorus, enough of the other micronutrients in our ground now. And if we can get that to continue to cycle, we'll do a lot better financially. And making that transition from fertilizing with commercial fertilizers to not fertilizing with those commercial fertilizers has been a difficult transition. We can see the drop in forage production as a result of denying that quick boost of nitrogen to our forages. But every time I think to myself, okay, I need to throw a little more fertilizer out there. It looks like it's starting slow. I just try to calm myself down, be patient. And I've been surprised if you can get past that what looks like a little slump in growth where things are starting to yellow. I don't know if the roots get down to a certain level and start tapping into old nutrients or whatever, but it comes back around. And we're committed at this point to avoiding any use of commercial fertilizers on our farm going forward. Now, we probably will have to put more poultry litter on from time to time, but every crop we have in the ground has legumes in it, and it is fixing nitrogen for us. So there's really not any need to put nitrogen down. And if you do, you actually set your soil back and you set your legumes back. They don't need to work in that symbiotic relationship with the soil biology to create that nitrogen. They just take it from whatever you give it, and I think it diminishes your future production. And basically, it's like the crack addict. Now your land and your soil is dependent on that commercial fertilizer, and you're going to have to keep on using it. So it's a tremendous cost. To put down half of the nutrient value on our farm that we did with the chicken litter, it would cost us the same amount that it costs us to put twice as much for commercial. Sorry, I've got somebody dialing in here on me. Twice as much for the commercial fertilizers as it does for chicken litter.
Producers listening need to remember the words removal. So if you've got a hay harvest, you're removing nutrients, you got to replace them. And hard maybe for some people to feed hay back on the hay land, but that would solve part of that removal issue. We tend to feed over on the pasture, and right. So we're putting all these nutrients in pasture. But if we could feed it back where we took the nutrients from, we could still keep that balance in place.
Yeah, and we stopped making hay a couple of years ago. In fact, this year I sold all my hay equipment because it cost me as much to bale it and make it as it does for me to buy it. And so if I'm taking those nutrients off, it's really hard to get it back where you took it from. Even if you're bale grazing, it's still kind of clumpy. So, you know, we as you do, Carl, we see our cost for our hay. A portion of that is our fertilizer strategy. So when we're buying a bale of alfalfa or a bale of regular hay, we figure about $20 to $25 of that is going to be nutrient value. So you know, I don't feel quite as bad about buying hay because of the fact that I'm importing all those nutrients to our farm.
Thank you, Tim and Carl. That's exactly what I was hoping to share with folks. Any other questions or comments for our guest speakers this morning? Kind of a last call before we wrap things up.
Be on the lookout for work that Gabe Pent is doing at the Steele's Tavern Research Center, AREC, and he's looking at some of this nitrogen economics, and is there an economic boost in production? And then also he's doing he's grazing the stockpile early, and it restarts the growth curve. So look into that.
All right, thank you, Carl. Any other questions? Last call. All right, well, not hearing anything. Thank you again, Carl and Tim. We really appreciate your time this morning. Thank you for joining us and sharing those great updates, great presentations. Both of those gentlemen have a wealth of knowledge. So if you have future questions or if something pops in your mind after the presentation this morning, just reach out to your county extension agent. We'll be glad to work with Carl and Tim, hopefully maybe get you an answer to your questions. So thank you both again for your time this morning and joining us. The presentation has been recorded. We will post a recording to our playlist at the link that's provided. So if you know someone that wanted to join but wasn't able this morning, please have them check out that recording. We'll have that information available later on. Next week, just to make an announcement, you see on your screen there, next week, our topic of discussion is going to be planning for wheat planting season. That's fast approaching us here. So we're going to have our small grain extension specialist, Dr. Wade Thomason, join us, as well as a local producer and retired extension agent, Mr. Paul Davis in New Kent County. They're going to give us some tips on considerations for wheat planting. Paul's going to maybe share a little bit of some of his success. I know he's a very successful small grain producer, has wheat yields near 100 or over, so bushels to the acre. So we're going to hopefully have a great comment and presentation from those two gentlemen next week. So please join us next Thursday morning at 9 a.m. for that. Also, if you joined us this morning, please take a few moments to fill out our evaluation. I think Stephanie was generous to post that into the chat box, the link to that. So if you please take a few seconds to evaluate the program, share any comments, recommendations. If you have a topic of interest that you'd like to see us do a session on, please share that with us. We really encourage your feedback. And lastly, I'd just like to thank the production team for this effort of VC Ag Today, all of us agents that are involved, especially my colleague agent Stephanie Romelchek in Westmoreland County, Laura Maxine in Hanover County, Mike Broadus in Caroline and King George County, and Trent Jones in Northumberland and Lancaster County. And also the help that we've had from some of our summer interns this year, Shelley Underwood and Skylar Swan. So thank you all for your efforts in making this possible. So with that being said, again, just like to thank everyone for joining us as always. Please help spread the word about the program to anyone you think would benefit from joining us each week. Thank you again, and hope everyone has a great rest of their week.
Thanks, Robbie. You too.